One of the most common complaint or criticism that I've heard and seen a lot in regards to Andor is how it doesn't feel like Star Wars. And apparently this largely stemming from the series not having any Jedi or Sith, the Force, mysticism, the hero's journey, and if we go by more recent patterns, then making the Imperials goofy and incompetent like some Saturday morning cartoon villains. Constant fan service crammed into each episode, or even a kid that the main character has to babysit, like Grogu in Mandalorian, Omega in Bad Batch, or Leia in Obi-Wan Kenobi. Okay, the last two are a bit on the extreme side, I'll admit, but you see where I'm coming from here. Now, I don't want to talk down on anyone's opinion on why they don't personally like Andor, because I get it, you can't please everyone and there will always be folks unhappy with everything, no matter what. I mean, still to this day, there are people who don't like Rogue One or Revenge of the Sith and don't think they're very good movies. Meanwhile, there will be a lot of other people who will say just the opposite. But as someone who really enjoyed Andor, I understand and also agree with some of the gripes surrounding it. Because, yeah, the first two episodes are boring and the finale could have been better. Not to mention that it's no doubt a slow burn. And like my main complaints for it, still continue to be a serious lack of aliens seen within the series, along with its Britishification of the Star Wars universe, which I find annoying even on my rewatches of Season 1. But other than the lack of aliens in some episodes, I don't buy the excuses that Andor doesn't feel like Star Wars. Because for me, it's actually the exact opposite. It feels very much like Star Wars, at least George Lucas's original vision of this universe. So let's dive into this for a second on the whole complaint on why people say Andor doesn't feel like Star Wars to them. And to answer this, we need to first figure out what Star Wars is exactly supposed to feel like. Going back to the original Star Wars A New Hope, which at first was only named just Star Wars, it of course set the tone and feel of the galaxy far, far away that we all love. The three main themes seen within that movie, according to StarWars.com, are people of different backgrounds can work together to produce great results, the importance of hope and believing in what you can't see, and the positive aspects of not relying too much on technology. All three of which are included in Andor as well. I mean, Nemik's manifesto or Lutin's speech alone make great fantastic examples of these points. But sure, some may argue that those are still too broad, so okay, let's look deeper. As other major parts of Star Wars is also family legacy and the importance of fighting back against the oppression of a fascist empire, showing how you can either choose a side or become a victim. And again, all of which of this is found within Andor. But for me especially, what comes to mind first and foremost is that Star Wars is inherently just World War II in space. Which, if you know your history, then this shouldn't come to any shock to you, as I don't have to explain how the Empire is essentially Nazi Germany, especially with its treatment of its civilians or those who oppose its rule. It's racism, or at least here more so xenophobia towards aliens. And as well similar government policies and of course the whole visual similarities between the Nazi German and Imperial armies and military gear. I mean, come on, after all, the literal Death Star battle at the end of A New Hope, believe it or not, George Lucas based it off of a World War II movie called The Dam Busters. Which should not come as to any surprise considering how popular World War II films and TV were during the 1960s and also the 70s when Lucas was writing Star Wars. It makes so much sense of how much all of that influenced him with his filmmaking. I mean, even his other famous movie trilogy, Indiana Jones, takes place during World War II after all. So with both movie franchises, Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Lucas essentially has Harrison Ford fighting off against with Nazis. The only real difference being that one takes place in space and the other on Earth. So, okay, what does this have to do with Andor then? Well, a lot, because Andor actually takes a lot of these World War II cues in Season 1, especially the second arc with the Imperial Garrison heist. I even said in my review of this arc that it almost felt like watching a World War II TV series at times, which probably explains why it's still my favorite arc of the season. We're given an Imperial garrison based in on a dam, similar to exactly how the Germans had such bases like this during World War II. And the troops themselves here are all specifically Imperial Army troopers, which is important as that trooper design takes heavy inspiration from the Wehrmacht military uniforms. So we have the Imperials, aka the Germans, having invaded a foreign land and looking down on the locals with plans of slowly removing their culture. Plus the emphasis on radio communications and taking that down, and a small group of rebels, aka the Allies, going undercover thanks to an insider, and just general war themes of espionage, survival, escape, camaraderie between soldiers, sacrifice, and the effects of war on society are all here on display. Because, well, it is Star Wars after all. Now, that's not to say that the rest of Andor doesn't share such World War II themes. Because, yeah, they do. Like the prison arc, similar to being how the Germans had their prisoners be involved in forced labor, especially with the whole Nazis' conscious policy of annihilation through work, under which their prisoners were literally worked to death with no plans of ever letting them leave. Yeah, I don't know about you, but that sounds oddly familiar to what was going on in the Andor prison arc. Then the final arc itself reminded me a lot of the German occupation of the Netherlands, for example, which, while it wasn't as extreme like in some of the Slavic nations, it still nonetheless had the locals be the splees of their foreign invaders, taking away their rights and freedom, resulting in clashes amongst the Dutch civilians and their German occupiers that led to chaos, anarchy, and even death on the streets. Not to mention, it's also by no coincidence here that the Imperial Army security troopers were all black, just like the Waffen-SS, or more specifically, the Nederlandsche SS that were stationed there. And least we not forget about the ISB playing a major role on this show too, which, hey, they're basically the combined elements of the German Gestapo and the SS. Or even your daily shopkeepers that secretly take part in the resistance movement against the German occupier. Yeah, there's quite a lot of examples as you can see, and these are only some of them of the World War II themes and tropes found within Andor. But it actually doesn't stop just there, especially to counter the argument that Andor is supposed to be the Disneyfication of Star Wars, or simply Disney's interpretation of what Star Wars should be, or any poor excuse like that. Which honestly is kinda funny when you really think about it, because the truth is, everything depicted in Andor has already existed for a long time, even, yes, before the Disney buyout. What I mean by this is Andor is the Star Wars that we've only before have seen in print. RPGs, novels, comic books, you name it. What we see in Andor has always existed within the Star Wars universe, and readers of many of the Legends content like Allegiance, Shatterpoint, the New Jedi Order, the Enemy Lines duology, just to name some examples, are exactly the kind of war-only perspective that has always existed in Star Wars, but for different reasons hasn't been shown much on the screen until now. Because, believe it or not all Star Wars content is about some fantastic Force-sensitive with plot armor that engages in a hero's journey. As, after all, it's called Star Wars, not Star Quest. So stories about the soldiers fighting in these wars in space, or even the everyday galactic citizens experiencing the same timelines as the swashbuckling Force-sensitive heroes is every much as Star Wars. So to summarize, the point is that while Star Wars started off as having a lot more to do and being essentially World War II in space, thrown in of course with the visual and narrative elements from westerns and samurai films, only afterwards did it begin moving its focus more towards the Force, Jedi, and Sith. But hey, at the end of the day, that's the beauty of Star Wars. It can mean different things to different people. And it's through these shows that Lucasfilm can focus on the unique parts that make Star Wars to what we know today. So while The Mandalorian focuses more on the Western influence of Star Wars, Andor on the World War II influence of Star Wars, then don't worry, as we'll soon have also the upcoming Ahsoka that will focus on the samurai influence and as well the Acolyte on the Force, Jedi, and Sith aspect. But no matter what, each show is and will always feel like Star Wars. Because at the end of the day, Star Wars is all of these in one. World War II or war in general, westerns, samurai, magical powers, and the unknown. It's all of this, but each of course with a sci-fi fantasy twist to it. So to say that Andor doesn't feel like Star Wars, or that Andor feels more like Star Wars than Book of Boba Fett, or that the Acolyte will feel more like Star Wars than Andor does, and so on and so forth. And well, to put it straight, is absolute nonsense. Each TV series is completely Star Wars in its own way, and whether it feels like Star Wars or not, that's entirely dependent on the viewer and what Star Wars means to them, aka you.